Let's paint Christmas cards, gift tags, wrapping paper and Christmas decor. Have you ever wanted to paint your own DIY advent calendar on paper? Let's make one. I wanted the image on the front of the calendar to be a snowy house on a winter evening. I made a little rough sketch planning out what would be behind the doors. And then a cleaner A4 size sketch of the house and transferred that onto watercolor paper using graphite transfer paper. I tried to make the masking tape edges thin so they wouldn't take up much space from the actual image. I searched through my building photos and ended up using a photo I took from a ship of the Stockholm coastline. I'll put more house reference photos up on Patreon soon. I painted the background of the moonlit night sky and a forest and the house and the front yard with watercolor. I like advent calendars where when you open the door it's kind of a continuation of the image on the front rather than just a separate illustration inside. I got this idea from a watercolor advent calendar I saw on Instagram last year, and when I actually started working on it I went back to see how the artist made it, but it wasn't in my saved folder anymore. But it must have been a temporary glitch because once I finished my calendar I checked again and found it. So she did actual doors and windows, and when you open them you get a peek inside the house or the shop behind the window or door. And that was what I wanted my calendar to be. You can open a window to the house and see who or what is inside the room, or see a slightly altered version of the image, like a bird appearing eating an apple from the tree. Or the terrace gate opens and you see a pair of red boots on the porch. I found it was easier to figure out the placement of the doors by ripping them out from an old advent calendar and putting them on the painting. I traced them onto the watercolor paper with an HB pencil, and then I used a carpet knife on top of a piece of wood to cut open 3 sides of each one so that the doors open towards the center of the image. You could use an exacto knife instead, maybe even small scissors. I made sure to scan the painting before cutting holes into it, by the way. I realized at this point that this is going to be a very delicate advent calendar. It rips easily and you can't spill anything on it or the watercolor starts spreading. Maybe I should do acrylics on cardboard next time instead of watercolor on paper. I took another watercolor paper and taped the pages together to make sure they're aligned the whole time. I didn't glue them together at this point yet though. I traced the doors onto the watercolor paper underneath and then sketched what's inside each door. Now, if you're over it at this point, then instead of trying to match the inside to the outside, just draw or paint separate, unrelated things inside the doors. It's a lot easier. But I sketched things like what's inside the ice hut, something added to the snowman, what are the tracks in the snow on the roof leading to, Christmas lights added to the balcony, that kind of thing. Same base image but altered. I love puzzles like this, so I thought it would be fun as an advent calendar too. But it's also a challenge. If you want to recreate this exact one though, I do have the outline drawing version of the front and the inside page as templates in my Patreon for all members, including the free tier. And I painted the inside page with watercolor too. I wanted to include some special days like a guide dog for the International Day of Persons with Disabilities on the 3rd. There's a Finnish flag on the roof for the Finnish Independence Day on December 6th. Day 10 is Animal Rights Day. St. Lucy's Day is on the 13th. And winter solstice is on day 21, although in some years it's on the 22nd. And once the painting was dry, I glued the pages together with whatever water-based hobby glue this is, just applied it on the edges of the lower page and then pressed them together and piled on some heavy books as a weight. I did pour out way too much of the glue, so I scraped the rest of it back into the bottle. I thought about decorating the white edges with a paint marker since I couldn't cut them off, but I decided the white rim is actually fine. I of course added the numbers out of order so that you actually have to search for the next one. Now the doors are already open and I ended up using little pieces of washi tape to close them. You could use little stickers too, but it might damage the painting more. And you could punch a hole at the top to be able to hang it on the wall. I found these mini wood slices from my grandmother's storage and thought they'd be perfect to paint for Christmas tree decorations. First up, I had to wash them because they didn't look very clean and only one of them had holes to begin with, so I had to make holes for the rest of them to be able to hang them. I was afraid I'd need a drill, but they were actually soft enough to dig into with a big nail or some kind of a needle. I used the sharp end of a math compass and I was about to regret this later, but I'll tell you when we get there. To make the painting go smoothly, I primed them first. I did about 2 coats with white gesso on all sides because I'm going to paint on both sides and the edges didn't look that neat either. Putting a paper clip through the hole so it doesn't get painted shut. I'm painting winter landscapes with different colors and scenery, a rounded blue gradient from dark to light, so the full moon will show up nicely on the dark. I tried stamping it on with the eraser end of a pencil and it was so messy I had to wipe it off with wet paper. The second try was a little better. On the lighter part, I painted 3 silhouettes, starting with just black vertical lines and then adding the branches. And a few more trees in between them to make it look more realistic and less uniform. I tried painting on the stars or snowflakes with a brush and they turned out very irregular. Or you could do the opposite gradient from light to dark. Paint on a half moon and do the 3 silhouettes again, but a little more sparse, and then add white on the trees, and now the snowy trees will show up better on the darker background. I figured I could use the paper clip and bend it to make a dotting tool to get uniform snowflakes. I needed a smaller moon, so I tried stamping it on with the other end of a paintbrush and it worked okay. You could also paint mountains. I did a solid color background and added solid color mountains of light blue, pink and white, and used a smaller paper clip as a dotting tool for the stars or the snowfall. Or you could do a multicolored gradient from blue to light blue to pink by painting the top blue and the bottom pink and then blending with white in the middle. I thought the tall wood slice with 1/2 cut out would work for a tall house silhouette, with some snow on the roof so you get more contrast between the black roof and the dark blue sky and light in the windows. Yeah, I realized too late that because of the placement of the hole for the string, the house is going to hang crooked. But what can you do? Or you could do just solid color background for a mansion. Maybe a red sunset or sunrise gradient sky for another dark house silhouette. These wood slices are actually juniper, which is protected, but I wasn't the one who cut them and they're much older and were apparently used for a wood slice curtain, and these were leftovers from that, so I might as well use them. As I said, I'm painting on both sides, but I thought I'd do similar paintings with different color schemes. So I tried a yellow, green and blue sky, kinda like the Northern Lights. The smallest dotting tool I found for making stars was a mechanical pencil. I don't know if you noticed, but I added a letter in each painting to form a secret word, So you can see if you can work it out in a second, but first I was planning to use some string I had to make a Christmas bunting out of these, but I could not get any string to go through the holes because they were too small, so I definitely make them with a bigger tool next time. And so I ended up using sewing thread and a needle instead. You can pause here if you want to find the secret word. I found these champagne and wine bottle corks for free at the reuse center because no one wanted them, I suppose. So let's paint them and turn them into Christmas ornaments. They do have price tags, so they were originally trying to sell them, but we found them at the free section. Some of them look really nice and I feel bad covering up the designs, so I'll try to use the more plain looking ones for this. I used white gesso to prime them with 1 or 2 coats all over. I tried making a blue-purple gradient background for a couple of them and then painted the rest of them red or blue. You could draw patterns on them with a paint marker. I made one with vertical stripes using a silver paint marker and white acrylic paint. The white paint might need a second coat to look good. A simple one is just polka dots with a paint marker or paint. I wish I could use the cold paint marker for this, it would go really nicely with the red, but it's still broken. On one of the blue ones I drew and painted these compound leaves. The Creabox paint pens I have are not great for delicate details though. They're a little too thick. Then I'm doing one with these circle designs with a dot in the middle, alternating between the silver and white. Horizontal stripes should be straightforward, but it became really wobbly and uneven. One of my favorites was the one with the white flowers on a red background. You could also decorate the tops and the bottoms of the corks. At this point I thought the set was a little too small, so I added 2 dark blue ones. One with star designs in alternating sizes and the other with spruce twigs and dots for white berries. But you need to hang them somehow too, so I tried piercing them with a needle and I broke the needle. Next I tried a paper clip. Well, it went through, but it doesn't have a sharp tip, so it broke off some of the cork and the painting. A safety pin, however, does have a sharp tip and it was robust enough to not break. After that I threaded a thin needle with white thread and pulled it through all the corks to make a bunting. If you hang them vertically, they'll keep spinning like this. I found these used champagne bottle corks for free at the reuse center and decided to turn them into Christmas decor. I used white gesso to prime the corks for painting, and in this case I'm not worried about covering the designs because these aren't really anything special, whereas some of the wine corks I painted previously were so pretty I felt bad covering them up. I did 2 layers of gesso on each cork and let them dry overnight. I mixed the acrylic paints into these little jars so they'd stay wet for longer and I could continue using the same color mix later. I did 2 layers of the base color for each one and also painted the bottom of the cork. I wanted to paint a set of woodland animal Christmas ornaments and I did a few different shades of brown, 2 more reddish brown ones and a white one. I was going back and forth between them to be able to work on one while the others were drying, but I'll show you one animal at a time. The first brown cork turned into a tawny owl. I feel like this shape fits owls especially well. I'm not painting anything highly detailed, I'll just do enough color patterns and features to make the animal species recognizable. So the owl has lighter areas on the circles around the eyes and on the chest to show the shape of the wings, some darker feather patterns on the chest, black eyes half closed, a yellow beak and yellow feet or toes, white highlight dots in the eyes. The second brown cork turned into a pear. It has a lighter snout and chest and black narrow eyes, a big nose, a black mouth and some outline of the front paws, nails and the hind legs. I did add tails for some of the animals, including a little tail for the bear. then the eye highlights, and I decided to give a few of the animals a bit of blush on the cheeks as a final touch to make them look cute. The first reddish-brown champagne cork turned into a fox, so I painted a kind of a white heart shape on the cheeks and the chest, a black nose, almost closed eyes, and a little smile, black paws and a hint of legs. I didn't like how thick the whiskers turned out, so I painted over them with white and repainted them with a smaller brush. The fox, of course, needed a tail with a white tip. I deliberately chose corks of different sizes and shapes, so the small reddish-brown one became a squirrel. Although, as I'm looking at it in hindsight, maybe it just looks like a cat. But anyway, I gave it a white snout and chest, big eyes, a black nose and mouth. The whiskers did turn out weird again, but I let them be. 2 highlight dots for each eye this time, since the eyes were so big, and it obviously needed a tail. The white cork became a rabbit at winter time. No color patterns for this one since it has the white winter coat on. But I did want to give it a hint of legs, but didn't want to use anything that dark apart from the nails, so I just outlined and shaded them with light blue and light purple, white eye dots and a fluffy little tail. The last brown cork turned into a wolf that's pretty similar to the fox, just with a bigger head and a bit different coloring. I did give it open eyes and white eyebrows though. Yellow-orange narrow eyes with black outlines and front paws and a tail. Now you may have noticed none of them have ears yet. You could just paint the ears too to make this more simple, but I decided to give them ears that stick out. I was thinking of using felt or some other fabric, but I went with cardboard. I cut out the ears from cardboard and left some extra under them. And I carved out little holes for them on top of the cork with a carpet knife, added a couple of dots of water-based crafting glue and stuck the cardboard ear in there and kept pressing for a while to let the glue dry. And then primed and painted the ears too once the glue was dry. Since these are supposed to be Christmas tree ornaments, they need some type of hooks or hoops for hanging them. I decided to use metal wire. It has to be thick and strong enough to push into the cork. You just fold it and cut it with pliers and hold it closed or fold it with the pliers and press it into the top of the cork in the middle to turn it into a hoop. And now you can thread a string through it and tie it, and you have a Christmas tree ornament. The ears do make these a bit fragile, because the cardboard might bend or come loose, but a couple of them did fall while I was taking the final photos and they were fine. I think I might varnish them to make them more durable though. These could maybe be used as keychains or back charms too. Do you have this brown shipping paper from packages you've received or flowers you bought? Let's turn it into Christmas wrapping paper with simple painting and stamping techniques. And if you don't have any, you can also buy a craft paper roll. Let's start with a freehand painting. I'm using just white acrylic paint to keep it simple, but you could go as colorful as you want. I'm painting flowers that resemble poinsettias, making each petal in one stroke and adding little leaves. I'm using a paint pen to dot in the anthers in the middle of the flower. But if you want to be specific about the placement of the pattern, you could wrap the presents first and then paint on them. I'm using a yogurt lid as an aid to draw a big circle on this one with a white colored pencil, and painting over it with white acrylic paint again. I'm painting different types of leaves and twigs on it to make a Christmas wreath. But you don't have to freehand all of it. I'm using the eraser end of a pencil as a stamp and stamping it on to add berries on the wreath. And you could use something even smaller like a paper clip to stamp on seed heads. And it doesn't have to be just paint either. I'm using the silver acrylic paint pen again to draw a curved string for fairy lights. And then a leftover cork from a previous Christmas decor video to stamp in the round light bulbs and adding the holders for the lights with the paint pen. But if you want to make a pattern with a more complicated shape, you could make a stencil. I had to try sketching a star a few times before I was happy with it. I cut a bigger and a smaller star out of the paper and traced them onto some cardboard and made cutouts for them and used that as a stencil on the wrapping paper and a sponge with the white acrylic paint. My cardboard piece was a little too small and I got some smudges on the wrapping paper. But you can hide the mistakes by stamping dots for snowfall or smaller stars with the other end of a paintbrush. Craft paper is pretty thick and tape alone might not hold it together, so I suggest tying the present with some ribbon or string. And maybe pressing the paper under some weight first if it's as wrinkly as mine. If you have craft paper or brown shipping paper lying around, you can make your own wrapping paper. I'm using acrylics and for the first one I'm painting simple houses with somewhat even diagonal spacing but alternating between red and blue and leaving a bit of space between them so that I can add green fir trees in there. And then painting white snowy roofs for the houses and adding some snow on the trees too. And finally some white window frames and trims and sketching out the doors. And making some of the windows yellow and others dark so that there's some variation of rooms with lights on or lights out. And fill in the doors as well. Once you get the hang of it, it gets faster. Sketching out the house with a few strokes. It doesn't have to be that polished or precise, and you don't have to do it with a small detail brush either. It's faster with a bigger brush and looks more lively. As long as the color scheme and the distance between elements is somewhat uniform, it's going to look cute anyway, at least from further away. And adding the white snow on all of them ties them together. I meant to add some woodland animals as well, but the houses and trees seem to be enough, so I'm painting another one for the animals. I'm starting with the same fir trees and spacing them out to leave room for the animals. I'm making some of them a bit darker and more bluish green and some a bit brighter and more yellow. I thought I'd try painting on the snow a bit differently and I preferred this more rounded style. I looked at white rabbits in different poses and sketched them with the paintbrush. Some sitting, some looking back over their shoulder, some reaching up to eat from the trees. I left them white with no added details to keep this simple. I picked foxes for the second type of animal and they turned out to be a bit trickier. I tried painting one curled up sleeping, a few sitting down, one standing. I made them very rough, so I added the white patterns and dark eyes and feet to make them more recognizable as foxes. Then I tried sketching and painting a running fox a few times. I'm not really feeling any of them, but this one especially looks more like a T-Rex than a fox. But when you look at the pattern as a whole, I think they still read as foxes. Now, was it unrealistic to sew foxes and rabbits together peacefully? Maybe, but I like the color combination. The craft paper is so stiff that the washi tape or paper tape I have can't hold it for more than a few seconds, so it does require some string around it as well. Don't have any gift tags for your Christmas presents? No problem. I'll give you 10 ideas to paint your own. You just need some carton or cardboard recycling and acrylic paints. Metallic paints optional. If your cardboard is shiny on one side, let's use the matte side, so the paint sticks easier. I do have another video coming about painting on shiny cardboard though. Cut the cardboard into smaller pieces. I'm gonna do 7 by 4.5 centimeters, which is about 3 by 2 in inches, or a bit smaller than that. Let's get the paints out. I'm using Crelando acrylic paints from Lidl and Plus Color hobby paints. Let's start with the classic Christmas tree. I'm gonna paint the whole background white. I'm not priming the cardboard, this is just white acrylic paint. You could prime these with gesso though, if you want your colors to turn out brighter, but it's optional. Let it dry for a second. Acrylic dries fast. I mixed green for the Christmas tree and I'm using a size 12 brush. This is a really small canvas to paint on, so a bigger brush makes it more difficult. The visible brush strokes form the Christmas tree texture. I'm using a much smaller brush for the details. This is size 1. I'm painting a star and a glow around it in yellow mixed lighter with white, and then adding the Christmas balls on the tree. But you wanna paint them under the tree branches, not above like I did first. So let's add some water to dilute the mistakes and then wipe them off with paper. And paint over them with white. Okay, the star doesn't show up on the white background, so let's add some darker yellow or get cold metallic paint. I tried adding darker green for shading on the tree, but it would be easier to do it before the Christmas balls. For this one, let's sketch it with a small brush first. I scrapped my first try cause it was too high on the cardboard, but it doesn't have to be a perfect sketch anyway. And then paint the background. I added some red with the blue to mute the color a bit. So I forgot to say what we're actually painting. These are 2 candy canes overlapping a bit. Let's paint them white first and shade on one side, and now we can sketch on the red stripes again with a small brush and then fill them in. And fix up the edges of the candy canes with the background color. So I was going to do a mistletoe for this video, and while searching for ideas and references, it came up that what I thought was a mistletoe is actually holly. Because the two are often pictured together, it led to the confusion of the saying kissing under mistletoe, but actually kissing under holly, not mistletoe. So this is holly. It has these spiky looking leaves and red berries. I'm doing 3 leaves in dark green and then a bunch of red berries in front of them. Let's separate the leaves from each other by adding a bit of an outline and a leaf vein in the middle, and make the berries and leaves more alive with some white highlights and more lighter green details. Now this is mistletoe. It looks more like an herb. It's actually a parasite that grows on trees. It has white berries, and the usual Christmas decoration mistletoe is a bouquet of branches tied together in red ribbon. The leaves have a round tip, unlike holly, and they're a bit lighter too. Let's add some lighter highlights, and I like to add some other pop of color. I'll do pink on the leaves and then the white berries. I decided to make a white background for a plant with white berries. Good choice. The next one is hanging Christmas lights. So let's paint the wire they're hanging from in black, and I'll do yellow for the first light. Just testing to see if I can fit another set of lights under it, and I can. So let's draw the other line and do the rest of the lights in kind of an upside down candle fire shape. I'm doing red, blue and yellow, but you can choose whatever colors you want. A bit of highlight and shadow on the light bulbs, and different colors of polka dots on the background to fill the rest of the space. Another very classic one, a snowman. I'm sketching the 3 snowballs on top of each other in white paint and then painting the background light blue. Going in and filling the snowballs, you can mix a hint of blue in the white to add shading on the snowballs. And let's mix a dark grey or black for the hat, stones for the eyes and mouth, and the buttons. Add a red scarf or any color you like. I'm trying to mix an orange for the carrot nose, but it's really not working with the red and yellow in this paint set because they're turning muddy. But let's add some white and make do. And fill the background with the white snowflakes. Pink isn't really a Christmas color, but I think it works with dark green. So for these little fig tree or pine tree branches, I painted a cross in green for 2 branches and then just keep adding needles with a thin brush. Highlights in lighter green and binding it together with a red bow. I think it needs some white highlights too. This one turned out pretty cute. I think I like this one the best. A white background for a Christmas wreath. Let's sketch a circle in green with a thin brush and then dot leaves to the wreath in different orientations. Mix a lighter green to add some texture and highlights. Dot white and red berries all over the wreath and tie a red bow on top. Optional, get out the metallic paints or markers. I'm dotting gold all over the background. Next up is a Christmas bauble. Sketch a circle with a thin brush. I'm gonna make a red one on a green background, like it's on the Christmas tree. Coloring in the Christmas ball, I painted the thing on top with gold paint, which really isn't standing out from the dark green, so maybe choose a more contrasting color, a much lighter one or a much darker one. I did the string in black and added some slightly darker shading on the ball to make it look more like a ball than a circle. White, zigzag and dot pattern on the ball. Did not like the black string anymore, so I painted over it with white. And added some baubles around the red one to make it look more like it's hanging from the Christmas tree. I wanted to make it an even 10, so here's the idea added at the last minute. Just a simple star. I'm doing a 5-point star by painting the first spike or triangle on top and then another line top left and a straight line across to the right and then back down to the left. Fill it in with yellow. I'm painting the background light blue but leaving a messy outline for the star. Getting out the metallic gold paint and covering the star with that and then painting a more precise white outline for the star using a thin brush to make it stand out more. Let's do some snowflakes or white polka dots to fill the background and maybe leave it there. But I guess I wasn't ready to stop painting yet and colored the insides with gold and added some yellow, pink and white highlights on the star. That honestly just looks strange. Once they're all finished, punch a hole with a regular paper puncher, or if the cardboard is too thick or you want the holes to be smaller or bigger, you could use punch pliers like this one. Both of them worked for me. And now you can slip it in the ribbon or string of the present once you've written your greeting and recipient on the back. Gift tags, check, but do you also need Christmas cards? Let's see if this is the fastest way to paint Christmas flowers using acrylics and turn them into Christmas cards. Cardboard recycling, like the sturdy back of a paper pad, is free material you can use to make cards. Let's take a postcard and use that as a template and trace the shape on the cardboard and cut it out. Mine is pretty thick, so I need to use the carpet knife. Let's prep the cardboard for painting to create a layer between the paint and the cardboard so the paint doesn't soak in and it stays brighter and more vibrant. I'm using white gesso to prime it, but if you don't have gesso, there are ways to DIY it, or you could choose to skip this step. I'll do a couple of red flowers on a white background and a couple of white flowers on a red background. So I'll do a paint layer on each card. I tested this on a scrap piece of cardboard first. I'm using 2 techniques. I'll start by painting the green poinsettia leaves with a flat brush, dipping it in 2 green paints and painting one half of the leaf in one stroke and then the other half in a second stroke. I didn't load the brush with enough paint and it turned out patchy, so you'll want to use some more paint. And do at least 4 leaves, making it round with a sharp point. So this technique works for wider leaves or petals. To make more narrow leaves, let's use a round brush and press it very lightly at first to create the sharp point and then press it down more to spread the paint stroke to make the rounded part of the leaf. You could also load a bit of white on the paintbrush to make the leaves look more lively. And in my case, more opaque, because the white paint I have is the most opaque one out of the ones I'm using here. Now moving on to the white or red bracts, which are not actually the flower petals, but modified leaves. I'm repeating the same techniques, painting one bract in 2 strokes for the lower ones, loading the brush with either white and dipping one end of the flat brush in green or yellow to create the leaf veins in the middle, or loading the brush with red and sometimes dipping it in white. And using a round brush for the smaller bracts on top and dipping the tip in a different color to create that line down the middle. It might not look good at this point, but it gets better as you add more layers. I recommend adding no water or very little water, and if you have enough paintbrushes, try using the same brush for the same color the whole time and don't rinse in between, because a wet brush will make this a lot harder. But also, don't let the paint dry on the brush for too long, because it will get harder to clean. I didn't like the fact that the green leaves were showing through so much, so for the next 2 ones I tried starting with the red or white leaves and just adding smaller green leaves in between. Before the final touches that actually make these look like poinsettias, I wanted to mention that if you make too many Christmas cards, you could take the extras to organizations who send them out to elderly people, like this one that collects Christmas cards in libraries in Finland. Once you have the leaves and bracts in place, let's add the actual flowers in the center. You could use the other end of a paintbrush to stamp them on or paint them with a small brush. I used yellow, white and dark red for the red ones and light and dark green for the white ones. And you can add the mid veins in the red or white leaves that don't already have them. If the flower looks lopsided, keep adding more leaves or make the existing ones bigger. If you love these winter city street Christmas cards as much as I do, let's try painting them with watercolor. I'm using a big postcard as a stencil to cut out from a bigger piece of watercolor paper and taping it down on a wooden board with masking tape. I'm using an erasable colored pencil for sketching, but you could also use a watercolor pencil that dissolves into the painting or a hard graphite pencil to make a light sketch. I'm mostly doing a freehand sketch of the buildings, but I'm using a ruler to get the walls of the buildings somewhat straight. I'm sketching the roofs, the windows and the crescent moon. I'm using a view in Stockholm Old Town as the reference. I think this is around the place where the Christmas market usually is. Adding a bit of extra space on top of the roofs and the chimneys for a snow cover. Let's start by painting the sky by wetting the paper around the houses and the half moon, and then adding a wash of blue watercolor to make a gradient sky. While waiting for the sky to dry, we can paint the parts of the buildings that don't touch the blue sky or each other so they don't blend. I'm outlining the building first and then filling it in, but leaving the windows unpainted. I'm doing 3 red buildings, slightly different shades of red, so I'm using the warmer red for some and the bluer red for others. If you mess up, you can remove the paint by blotting with a paper towel while it's still wet. And then there's a green and a yellow building in between the red ones. The sky is now dry, so I'll paint the moon and the chimneys. They're black or grey in the photos, but I'll make them brick chimneys, so I'll use a small brush and a couple of different colors. First red and then mixing a bit of blue in the warm red to make it more brown. I'm erasing the sketch from the roofs since they'll be snowy and white, so I don't want the blue sketch to show through. I like the look of partly snow-covered roofs, where some of the snow has fallen off, so I'll paint some of the roofs partly grey. I want to leave the window frames white, so I'm only painting little strokes for the window panes. I'm scattering some dark windows in there and doing stripes for the tin roof with the same colors still on the brush. Now, I thought the moon was too saturated, so I took a wet, clean brush to lift off some of the yellow to make it more pale. I made the rest of the window panes yellow or orange to look like they have lights on inside. Added some blue or grey shading for the snow on the roofs and some shading under the windows and the roofs with browns and blues. I'll show you an alteration on this idea too, but first, the thing that's going to tie this all together and make it a Christmas card for me is adding snowfall. So let's do that by splatter painting. I'm using white acrylic paint and a small brush, or two actually. I'm wetting the brush and loading it with watery white paint and then tapping it on the other brush over the painting. It makes different sizes of splatters and they'll be more randomly placed than if you just dot on some white paint. So it looks more realistic. It is a little messy though. So the other idea I wanted to do was to add a big Christmas tree in the middle. The circles are for Christmas lights, there's snow on the foreground and some houses further back. I'm painting the glow around the Christmas lights light yellow and the sky blue, but adding some darker tones near the ground while it's still wet so it blends well. And I decided to try making northern lights by dropping some green and yellow on the blue wash while it's wet and letting it blend in. Light blue shading for the snowbanks and orange inside the light glow circles for the light bulbs or candles. I guess they're candles actually. Now painting the spruce tree green partly covers up the yellow circles, but it's fine, they still show through a little. And here they are. There's more of a city winter scene with apartments and a suburban one with houses. I'm painting 3 flower Christmas cards using watercolors. I used this small Dale Rowney postcard watercolor paper pad, which is almost empty now. I found it at a discount at an art supply store once. It's acid-free and 300 GSM, which is a pretty nice thickness. But the finished paintings might still warp a bit. The sheets actually look like postcards on the back with the address lines and a place for the stamp. I wouldn't put these in the mail without an envelope though, but you could put a sticker or something in the place of the stamp. I actually used these as Christmas cards last year. I made them on December 23rd to be exact, which some might think is kind of last minute, and I hand delivered them on Christmas Eve, so I didn't have to send them by mail at all. As mentioned in the previous Christmas flower drawing videos, I got help from the Flower Painter's Essential Handbook by Jill Bays for these paintings. She talks about both pencil sketching and watercolor painting flowers in the book. The book and the supplies I used will be listed below if you're interested in any of them. And the links are often Amazon affiliate links, so if you buy anything on Amazon through them, you're also supporting this channel at no extra cost to you, and it does help me out. I made quick colored pencil sketches of each flower off camera first to practice and figure out the composition before the actual pencil drawings and these watercolor paintings. I sketched out the outlines on the watercolor paper pad with colored pencils. You could use watercolor pencils if you want the sketch to blend into the painting as you add water, but I just did a light sketch with normal colored pencils with corresponding colors so they won't show up much under the watercolor painting. I'm not sure why I chose orange for the hyacinth leaves instead of green though. I wish I'd written notes while I was painting these so I'd know what I was thinking. I painted these with Winsor & Newton Cotman Half Pan watercolor set, which has student grade paints. It also comes with palettes stacked up inside the top, so you don't need a separate paint palette for mixing paints. I used a bit of wet on wet on the leaves, adding darker green in the tips and letting it blend in. I left some white highlights while painting the first layers of the flower bulb and the leaves. And once the layer dried, I'd add another one of either the same shade or something a bit darker to part of the area to create shading or texture. With the flowers, I made the insides darker, leaving the edges of the petals light. I tried adding yellow in the middle of the flowers a bit too early, while the blue paint was still wet, so it blended into the blue more than I intended, and I realized it was time to let the painting dry before continuing. I was working on all 3 paintings at the same time, so I could let one layer dry while I was painting one of the others. And I'll show the clips in chronological order, so we'll be jumping between the paintings in this video. So the same process for the poinsettia painting. Sketching the flower buds and green and red leaves with soft Faber-Castell colored pencils, and then painting the first watercolor layers with a bit of varying shades for each leaf to not make the painting look too monotone. To make sure the different shades of red leaves didn't blend into each other, I left a little strip of white paper between them. When I edited the scan of the painting afterwards for my Redbubble shop, I cut these white sections out with the background, making them transparent, so whatever background color the item has could show through in those areas. But I did also make a version with a white outline, in which case they'll always be filled with white regardless of the background color. All of these 3 paintings are in my Redbubble shop as stickers, greeting cards, prints and home decor items, by the way. Link is in the info card or below. I then let the poinsettia dry and started on the amaryllis. I used a mix of a real flower, the first quick sketch, and the flower painting book as references for each of these paintings. You can always use photo references that could be your own photos or ones from a free stock photo site like Pixabay. Although I recently heard that free stock photo sites that claim the photos are free for commercial use with no attribution required, like Pixabay, might actually have pictures that are not free and have been uploaded by someone else than the owner of the image. So if you want to be sure you can use an image, do a reverse image search before using the image and see where it originated and what are the actual terms of use. After the first layers on the amaryllis, I went back to the poinsettia and added shading and leaf veins on the red leaves. On the green leaves, I left the lighter wash in the leaf veins and painted a darker layer between them. I made a lot less leaf veins than an actual poinsettia has, but I think it looks nice anyway. I finished this one first since it was my favorite painting out of these 3. In the meanwhile, the hyacinth had dried and the yellow had spread all over, but it's fine. I just added a bit more blue on the flowers where the yellow had replaced it, while adding the darkest shading elsewhere in the flower too. In the amaryllis painting, I had previously painted an even wash on the open flower on the right, and now I added the second layer for only some of the petals. I think I like this painting more at this point than after what I did next. But while letting it dry, I turned to the hyacinth, which had dried off enough to add some final details. If you can't wait for your painting to dry, you could also use a hairdryer between layers, but I rarely bother doing that. I just tend to work on something else or a different part of the same painting during the drying time. I inked the little roots of the flower bulb with a micron pen, which is waterproof, so you can also paint over it. Beware though, because there are also fake micron pens that are not waterproof that might screw up your painting. I linked to a web page below that shows you how you can tell from the design of the pen whether it's real or fake. I added little yellow dots of paint in the middle of the flowers, and this time only on the dry flowers to make sure they won't spread out again. And then I ruined the amaryllis by adding too much stuff to the open flower. I still like it, but I think it took a turn for the worse here. Also, the yellow watercolor anthers were not really showing up on the red flowers, and I of course hadn't thought of leaving white areas for them in the beginning, so I ended up adding a bit of acrylic paint on them to make them stand out on the darker red. And unlike the two other paintings, where I used very little or no inking, I made a non-continuous outline for the whole flower using a micron pen. But if you want to draw flowers for Christmas cards, watch this video next. See you there. I'm trying to get a nice paint job for the thumbnail. Oops, I've had this package for a year and they still smell bad.